So there are very few things that are better in life than getting to introduce people who you love and respect dearly. And I've just been given the great opportunity to introduce a very old and dear friend of mine, Roy Austin. We are absolutely so thrilled and honored that you could be with us today. I met Roy because we both worked in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. I started just as Roy was leaving, I think to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., and he was an absolute legend in the Civil Rights Division. He was known for having taken some of the toughest cases, for being a skilled prosecutor, a thoughtful leader, and just a wonderful all-around person. Roy and I have stayed friends over the years, and I have watched his career absolutely soar. We reconnected when he was the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, where he led great efforts in the front office for the first, I think, 4 or 5 years of the Obama administration, looking at civil rights across the country, and was responsible, really, in so many ways for leading and working on a lot of the changes in the special litigation work and in the criminal prosecution work that have come out of the department, and I think been so effective. Roy today occupies what I would argue is a really unique position in our country, which is he is the Deputy Assistant to the President of the United States. And he is at the Domestic Policy Council, where he handles criminal justice, social justice, and several other issues. Candidly, the breadth of his portfolio is stunning. There's almost no issue that touches criminal justice where Roy wouldn't be the first call that the President or his team would make. I have been so lucky during the past 4.5 years to work closely with Roy on many issues. I think one of our mutual shared passions is big data and data to transform the criminal justice system. But truly, Roy has been involved in efforts across, when you think about the work the President has been doing during the past 2 years, being the first sitting president to visit a federal penitentiary, coming out with advice and guidance to eliminate solitary confinement in the federal system. All of this, it's not just the President of the United States, it's also, we know the person who stands behind him and stands next to him, and that's Roy Austin. It would be impossible for me to say enough good things about how much I like, respect, and respect the person who I'm sitting with, or how lucky I think we are as a country to have both a president and a person like Roy who's in a position of really thinking about, is American criminal justice working, and what can we do to change it and to make it better? So I am deeply excited to introduce Roy to you. I've told you a little bit about his career. He's been the Deputy Assistant to the President for some time now. Before that, he was at the Department of Justice as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General. He's also worked at law firms and, of course, as an Assistant U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., and as a litigator in the Civil Rights Division. I am so excited to hear your speech, Roy, and you're the best for joining us today.
Well, with an introduction like that, I cannot but disappoint you. But the takeaway from that was when she said a very old friend. Anne has been absolutely awesome in various respects and the amazing things that she has done. First in the civil rights, well, first as a DA, Civil Rights Division, AG, but her work with the Arnold Foundation was something which I got to see very closely, and the importance of the foundation world leaning in really hard on these issues and finding the answers that many of us in government have been looking for is unbelievable and phenomenal. And now she brings that full time to NYU, which is great. I was looking at the crowd out here, and I realized that I need to give CLE credits to my kids. It may actually get them to show up when I'm in the house and say hi to me. It's pretty amazing that so many people have come to this event. A few years ago, I prosecuted a case. And in that case, there was never a display of a weapon. A police officer showed up outside of a hotel where a young woman was engaged in prostitution. And he just stood there. And the woman said to him, why are you here? What do you want? And he said, let's just go inside and talk about this. And she's like, no, you're a police officer. This was a fully uniformed police officer. And She's like, no, I'm not going inside. Tell me what you want. And he said, let's just go upstairs and talk about this. And after some time, she relented and went up in the room. And he proceeded to rape her, never once pulling out a gun, never once displaying handcuffs, never once hitting her physically. And the reason why I start with that story is that as we've had this discussion today, use of force starts the minute a police officer shows up at the scene. And in fact, they are taught that. The continuum of force is show up at the scene. The next step is use your voice before we even get to hands-on. And so we have to look at the power dynamics of force when we're talking about police, and they start the minute the officer arrives at the scene. We also have to think about the impact of the police when they do arrive at the scene. Every single time you have a jump out in a minority community and they take a young person down, that's a use of force that is seen by that entire community. And we have conversations right now about youth exposed to violence and about what they see and how that translates. And every time they see that, it has an impact, and an incredibly important impact, and one which we should be looking at and measuring and talking about. So I know the discussion and the easy thing is when we see someone who dies at the hands of the police. But we have to remember that this discussion starts the minute the police officer shows up at the scene. And what does that mean? And what does that mean to certain neighborhoods who feel like they are over-policed? And when they feel like every interaction with the police is a negative one. And so when we're talking about use of force and we're talking about that, that needs to be our starting point. Now, I know that you heard from Vanita Gupta, and she had home field advantage coming here. I didn't end up going to NYU. But she's doing absolutely phenomenal and amazing work right now. What she's doing with the Civil Rights Division is awesome. And she's doing it, one case at a time. And that's incredibly important. You have to prosecute those who do wrong. Okay? You have to do that. That's one case at a time, and that's where I started my career. And I was like, this is great. I get to prosecute people who are breaking the law. And then I sat back a little bit and asked myself, what's the impact of that? The impact of that one prosecution. And you look at one of the most notorious cases to ever come out of the Civil Rights Division. I didn't work on this case, but this was a case involving a New Orleans Police Department officer who ordered the killing of a woman who made a complaint against him using a drug dealer he was working with. Most notorious case, I think, that's come out of the Civil Rights Division's criminal section, because that officer is the only officer who is on death row through the Civil Rights Division. Because the drug dealer went up to this woman who was standing on a corner and shot her in the face and killed her. But that didn't change New Orleans. As horrific as that was, the people who were doing law enforcement were able to say, well, that wasn't me. I would never do that. That person is different. It didn't change New Orleans. And we know it didn't change New Orleans because then you move a number of years later and you end up with Danziger Bridge, where a number of officers jumped out of a Ryder truck and started shooting up 2 families. And that didn't, not even that incident changed New Orleans. And so then I got this opportunity to take this job with the Special Litigation Section, where they did patterns and practices of misconduct. And I was like, this is, okay, this is taking it to a whole nother level. And I had the honor of working with Christy Lopez, who you heard from, who knows more about policing reform than anyone else that I know. And we went in there, we looked at New Orleans, we found that New Orleans was a broken police department in pretty much every way you could be a broken police department. You know, they were stopping people without articulable suspicion. They were stopping minorities more so than they were stopping anyone else. They were failing to investigate sexual abuse cases. Everything we looked at, we're like, what? This is insane. And so we worked with them, and we ended up with a consent decree for the New Orleans Police Department, a roadmap of how you can repair a police department. And our thinking as we did this was, this is going to change policing because every police department is going to read this report and they're going to know exactly what they have to do. And I don't think there's a person outside New Orleans who read that report. You would think that police chiefs would be like, I don't want the Civil Rights Division coming in here. This is the simple stuff that I have to do to change. And you know, not to insult Christie's intelligence here, but I mean, this wasn't astrophysics. Train your people. Have supervisors who supervise. Hold people accountable. Collect and release data. I mean, if you look at it, that's what this thing says at the end of the day. But it hasn't changed policing. Now, it will impact New Orleans, but it hasn't changed policing. And under what was Tom Perez's leadership and now Vanita Gupta's leadership, the special litigation section has now opened dozens of cases, and currently under Robert Musi, who you also heard from, his leadership. Dozens of cases. But our problem is 18,000 police departments. So dozens of cases when the only person who reads that report is that jurisdiction right there, we still have a problem that we're not reaching. Because we have to reach 18,000 police departments. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there isn't a police department, and I'm sorry, Chief Thompson, there isn't a police department that is getting this 100% right yet. I'll tell you, Scott Thompson is doing an awesome job in Camden. Absolutely awesome job thinking about this thing, bringing in new ideas, changing things, but as you will hear, if you haven't heard already, culture eats policy for breakfast every morning. You cannot change a culture purely by policy changes. It takes a very long time. Now, we have to balance that with the realization that as of now, in 2016, 16 police officers have been killed by firearms. At this time last year, there were only 8 officers. We have to, in this discussion, acknowledge the danger that exists for police officers. It is the only way to have an honest conversation about this. We ask them to come in and deal with our worst situations, and I know this firsthand. I was a prosecutor who was doing the civil rights cases, okay, prosecuting officers who were bad. Who were the most important people by my side? The fellow law enforcement officers who were willing to do those cases. I was prosecuting the cases which pretty much most of the people in this room would agree need to be prosecuted in some way. The domestic violence, the sexual abuse, the domestic homicide, the human trafficking cases. Who was the most important person in those cases was the line officer who was working with me. We have to acknowledge the importance and the sheer necessity of policing in these communities. I've also been on the other side of this. As a law student, a couple of us were driving from the south side of Chicago to the north side of Chicago when all of a sudden we got pulled over by a bunch of police officers in plain clothes. Pulled over, ordered out of the car, as they searched through our car, saying nothing at all to us, finding nothing and saying, get the hell out of here. I took that story to my law school, to my law professor, to my criminal law professor. And I said to him, you wouldn't believe what just happened to 3 of your students last night. His remark back was, that's not the Chicago Police Department I know. Not just a law professor, a criminal law professor said this. And it started to give me the realization that this is a bigger problem than just a couple police officers going rogue. This is a much bigger problem than that. Now, we have all these ideas, and it's hard for me to come up here at this point after you've heard from brilliant people who have been studying this for a very, very long time and who get this problem. But we have lots of ideas and unfortunately very few answers. I heard up here the discussion on implicit bias, and yeah, can't we just train people not to be implicitly biased? And we can't. We don't have a clue how to make it happen. We really don't. So we put you through a 4-hour course. Well, that's not working so well. Let's give you 8 hours. Okay, let's give you 16 hours on implicit bias. As soon as you're done with that course, you go back to your life, and the implicit bias is still there. We know we have a huge problem with crisis intervention. How do we deal with people who are in mental health crisis? That's a lot of our uses of force. How do we deal with that? We have a system right now where we don't do anything for people with mental illness, or we certainly don't do enough for them. And yet we're like, why are police using force? I don't understand. And we can't just, this isn't just training. You can't just train a police officer, well, that person's in a mental health crisis, call a social worker and it'll be fine. Because we have this system that is broken down where we expect our police to deal with these really tough, incredibly hard issues that none of the rest of us are willing to do. We have early warning systems that talk about officers being late, officers getting complaints, officers maybe using force, that don't identify bad officers. We have all these early warning systems, and I would tell you that they're probably not evidence-based at this point. We have complaints that we try to measure, and we realize that we have whole communities of immigrants who will never complain, and others who just feel like a complaint is a waste of time and will just sit there and take it. So we have these incredible ideas, and we do not have solutions for them. We're also in a tough period right now. In a tough period when you have leaders like Chief Thompson and Chuck Wexler talking about, let's look at use of force differently, and getting slammed for doing it. You know, you would hope when you start a conversation about the sanctity of life for everyone that would be a nice starting point, and yet they're getting slammed for taking this very courageous position on this issue. That's a problem, and we're not having an honest conversation if that's where we are. So what are we doing as an administration to try to deal with these problems? We're doing everything that we feel we can. You know, everything from school discipline. You know, why is it that so many of our young black boys and brown boys are ending up being disciplined for silly, stupid stuff, ending up in the juvenile justice system, which leads them to the criminal justice system? We've seen the videos with the school resource officers. Unfortunately, they're cropping up all too frequently. We did a federal equipment report. You're talking about I heard a conversation about the protests. You know, when you roll in with tanks for people exercising their First Amendment rights, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be a problem. That's a use of force that we need to be talking about and discussing. So we did a federal equipment report talking about how we're going to measure when people use this and limit the use of these for incidents where they don't need to be used for. We did a report on fees and fines and fixed bail, the criminalization of poverty. Again, remember what I started talking about, which these young people seeing these interactions with police. Well, them and their parents, when the police show up to arrest them for a speeding ticket that has not been paid for a long time, that's a problem. The amazing work done by Vanita Gupta and Christy Lopez and Ferguson when people get stopped for jaywalking and arrested for jaywalking. I know that black people like to move fast, but I didn't know we jaywalked more than everybody else. But it took that report to shine a light on that. And so We followed that up with a fines and fees report on top of this amazing Ferguson report to talk about the criminalization of poverty, and there was a letter sent out to courts to tell them to stop locking people up simply because they are poor. We did a report on solitary confinement. You know, the brutalization of individuals who are incarcerated, who we lock up for ridiculous amounts of time, alone in a cell, and oftentimes and say, well, go on out on the street now, you're good, you've done your time. And then we are surprised when they recidivate. The brutality of that and of that practice has to end, and we are doing what we can to try to stop that. We had a conversation about body cameras here, and under phenomenal work by Denise O'Donnell and the Bureau of Justice Assistance, this body camera toolkit to help jurisdictions to implement their body camera policies, looking at the policies around the country. We have My Brother's Keeper looking at the situation for boys and young men of color and their peers. And we have the Task Force on 21st Century Policing, where we brought together chiefs and advocates, academics, young people, all came together and came up with 59 recommendations on how to change policing, change that police and community relationship. All of these things we have done, I will tell you, are beautiful. And I will tell you that they are gathering dust. Because what we need is for more people to read these things and to do these things, because it's not like we don't know that more black and brown kids are arrested. It's not like we don't know that we have this criminalization of poverty. It's not like we don't know that we have excessive uses of force that need to be dealt with. We know these things. And the thing we have to do is do something about it. And every time I get a chance to come before an audience, I say the same thing. Take these reports in your hand, walk them over to your mayor's office, your city council's office, your police chief's office, hand it to them and say, are we doing these things? And if we're not doing these things, why not? But I keep doing that, and I'm not sure it's ever happening, because we all have lives, and the minute we walk out of here, we got to get to our kids' soccer games. So let me try to put it on one thing, one ask. I want the whole thing, but let me do one ask, because I'm just trying something new now. Because I've sat in your seat, I've heard from really great speakers and huge panelists, and I have to leave and I have to get to soccer practice too. So my one ask is let's push on the data transparency piece. We have something that we're working on at the White House called the Police Data Initiative. And the idea is, let's put out there publicly police activity, not crime data. Okay, we all know where to find our homicide data and our robbery data, all of that. Police activity. So, uses of force, complaints against officers, officer injuries. Put it out there, publicly. Every police department should be doing this. That's the one ask. Go to your police department, ask your police department when you go home, are you putting this data out there? And if they're not, ask them why not. Because I can tell you that it works. It's a first step. You know, to use the phrase from a trial advocacy professor I had the pleasure of teaching with, you know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. This is that one bite. Okay? Put your data out there. And I'm not telling you what data to put out there. I'm telling you to start the process and see how it actually helps. How just being transparent helps you to build community trust. Because when the people ask you, well, how often are you using force? You say, it's right there. When they ask you, well, you're telling me this is a dangerous job for officers, you say, well, look, my officer injuries are right there. And we've heard from districts like Dallas and Camden and others who've said this works. And if they keep pushing back, you can say, you know, one thing I can tell you right now is it's going to save you money on FOIA. It's right there. And I'm not going to define for you the areas, whether it's every unresisted handcuffing or it's every shooting, but start playing with transparency a little bit and see if that doesn't start to feel good. And start to get more, and start to get your public more engaged, your community more engaged in the topic, and get researchers who are out there start to dig through it to find out what it means and what more should be put out there. And how do we make sure that it's disaggregated by race and gender? I can tell you right now, Louisville joined. They right now are putting out every single citation that they issue disaggregated by race and gender. Anyone not visiting Louisville because they have data transparency right now? It works. And I call it the anti-Ferguson. Because you know, the people of Ferguson who were being stopped for jaywalking, they actually knew it. But they had no data, no story to tell beyond their own experience. Well, now everyone can look at what's happening in Louisville. They can say, well, why is it that the 100 block of Oak Street seems to be the only place where you're stopping people for, name the very small crime or small infraction? So that's my ask, is go back to your communities and ask for that one thing, transparency on data, and see if that doesn't start to snowball into some real change. Now, the inequities that we're seeing in policing are the same inequities we're seeing in everything else. Same thing we're seeing in schools, same thing we're seeing in employment, same thing we're seeing in housing. And we put this enormous burden on our police officers to solve all of these problems and to get it right when none of the rest of us are getting it right. And that's a problem, but I think that there are courageous police officers, police chiefs, who are willing to take this on and realize because they are the most visible, because in many ways they have so much power, that they can be the first to take it on. We also have to have just an honest conversation. We have to be able to be critical of policing and not have everyone think that we're anti-police. And we have to acknowledge at the same time there's some real violent crime that's happening in our communities and not be anti-black or anti-brown. If we start the conversation from that place of honesty, if we start the conversation recognizing the humanity of the little black boy, the little brown boy, the police officer on the street, if we start our conversation recognizing that humanity, we can truly take a step forward. Thank you so much for your time.
So are you okay?
Yeah, I think, yeah, and I'll take a couple questions if folks want. I think we're good. You don't get CLE credit if you don't ask questions. I think we're good, right?
Yep, we're good. Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Oh, wait, sorry. I think we...
Yes. I think the elegance of your proposal is superb, and I applaud it, the simplicity of it and the clarity of it. And that, of course, is what takes to get through the malaise that all of us suffer from in this area. I think there's one other simple, elegant thing that we should be thinking about. And I haven't heard it mentioned here all day, although I may have missed it. And that is the culture of police lying. Police seem to choose, and I know this because I'm now the chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board in New York, seem to opt for false statements when the truth would serve them just as well. And now with videotape and other means of clearly showing that when police don't tell the truth, they can be held accountable, there are ways to address police falsehoods that never existed before. And it seems to me that the progressive police leaders can genuinely do something about this in two ways, the negative and the positive. The negative is obviously discipline and imposing discipline when it's called for, when there are obvious falsehoods being put forth in official police conduct. The positive, though, is actually more important because in paramilitary organizations, as you know, the reinforcement of integrity really works. It really works when a police officer is held up as a superb public servant, is commended, and is given advancement when they stand up with integrity. And it seems to me this is another simple reform, a simple approach. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but changing culture in the way that you're describing, for instance, by transparency, it's just as important to do that by showing transparency in the context of police reporting conduct and telling the truth about what happens on the street. And to do that, they have to be held accountable on the one hand, and they have to be reinforced and rewarded when they do it effectively on the other, in my view. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for your comment. My first thought is simply that I have no evidence that police officers are any more dishonest than any of the rest of us. So I honestly do not. And I think that actually if you look at policing, I think the question is more on where they are held accountable. Because most line officers are going to tell you, I'm tired of being held accountable because my shoes weren't properly shined or my uniform wasn't on correctly, or something like that. As opposed to, what happens on the police report itself. And a lot of police officers are going to tell you that that's the place where it is. But I just think, I think what you're saying is important, but I don't think it's as simple a solution as it would seem. We want everyone to be honest in every profession, in every way. And unfortunately, we just see, too much dishonesty across the board. So I'm looking for something simple. Just telling people to tell the truth, it doesn't, you want it, but it doesn't quite work as a policy proposal that I think that we can get done and I only got 286 days in this position, so I wasn't counting, I just guessed. But that's all I got left, and I just don't think I can quite get my hands around that one. But I appreciate the comment.
You started off your comments talking about what it was like the profile coming from the south side of Chicago as a black law student, the same place where your boss started off with. And I'm wondering if, do you feel like you were at like an age of enlightenment, part of the reason being that we have a black president now? And what is it like to be there and to talk about these things on a personal basis with President Obama? And what do you think is happening?
So I'd love to say that I have many personal conversations with the president, but we just talked about honesty and dishonesty, so let me be honest. And I have not. But we have a president, the first president to go to a federal prison. Just last week, the president sat down with a bunch of people who he commuted their sentences, who served like 15 to 20 years incarcerated. A president who brought me in part because he wanted to expand this conversation on criminal justice, who hired an attorney general like Eric Holder, who very quickly upon coming into office went after the Fair Sentencing Act and established Smart on Crime. You have a president who was a community organizer and who saw these things firsthand. And one of the things that we've done in a lot of the work that the Special Litigation has done, and that's where I kind of learned this, is you have to bring everyone to the table because they all have experiences that are incredibly important. We have a president that's had experiences that are incredibly important, and he's willing to talk about those. I mean, he said when he established My Brother's Keeper, basically, but for the grace of God go I, with all these young kids, and that he had a more forgiving environment. It's important to have a leader who actually gets it. And I think that's what we have, and I think that's what's so important. I think that's the thing that, I may miss the most. It's just knowing that when you're having those conversations about those issues that touch you the most, knowing that the person at the other side of the table completely gets it. So. Sorry.
Trying to tie it all together, bringing back what you just said about requesting data transparency, it was great. So my question is bringing back the community involvement. I happen to live in a small town. I can walk up maybe to my Maplewood Police Department and say, do you put this out? Or I'm actually friends with my mayor. But bringing back the community involvement, and maybe contrary to the protests when things happen, I think, do you have a suggestion from your grassroots organizing and your president's grassroots organizing, how either in small towns or bigger towns, what kind of pressure, regardless of whether we're lawyers or not, as members of our community, do we get involved? I was a former PTA president. Do we say, let's all go together, whether it's to my small town or to your city council? What are the suggestions you can suggest? How, you don't really mean like an Alice's restaurant, let's march right in. What are the concrete suggestions you can make how to try to find out about the data transparency that's already there and put pressure on to do that, regardless of small or large populations?
I guess actually I do mean that. Because I'm from a relatively small town myself. Well, I'm from a small town, and I now live in a relatively small town, where you have access to your town council. You have access to your mayor. You have access to your police chief, where you can literally walk up to them and say to them, why aren't you doing these things? So I think there's that. I think certainly if you can rally a larger group of people together and explain the importance of this, because better policing is better public safety. I mean, that's the thing that people have to understand is if we can get the dangerous people help or off the street as soon as possible, it's going to enhance public safety for all of us. And transparency it should be easy because the data doesn't belong to the police department, it belongs to us. There's nothing secret about the number of times an officer uses force. There shouldn't be. And so there's a logic to it as well. But no, it is gather whoever you can and say, this is important. Let's see if we can move this one thing. We're having a whole discussion right now in the White House about civic engagement because too few people are involved in their government. And I think sometimes it's too hard to figure out what is the thing I'm going to get involved in? What is the thing I'm going to do? And that's part of why I've kind of changed what I say here to let's pick one thing. And if we all as a community start doing it, and then pointing out, right now we have about 48 jurisdictions that are going to do this. Start pointing out, well, why aren't you doing it when they're doing it? What's different about that chief than you? What's different from that mayor than you? And I think that's how you start the groundswell. And there's been, the media has been involved in taking a look at this and saying, hey, this is actually a pretty decent idea. And so I think all these movements start with one person, and many of these movements have been very small, and they've been able to get a lot of energy behind them. So anyway, I know you all are ready to go, so have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I want to thank Roy again for coming and thank Vanita Gupta, our morning keynote. I'd like to thank all the speakers. I can see everyone wants to get out, so I will not attempt to follow Roy. I just wanted to say, again, at the center, we rely on your support. We try to do things in a balanced, nonpartisan way. And so we're thrilled to see all of you here, and we hope you continue to come to our programming events. So thanks so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you very, very soon. Thanks.